This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and this episode is brought to you by Silna Health. That's S-I-L-N-A, the premium front-end RCM company that leverages technology with a team of onshore insurance experts to handle benefit checks, eligibility checks, and prior authorizations. Finally, a vendor that you can trust, like a full-time employee that scales with your business. Just mention the Profiles in Leadership podcast to receive a free trial. Today, our guest is Gabe Freyaldenhoven, who is the owner of River Valley Therapy and Sports Medicine, a series of outpatient therapy clinics in north-central Arkansas, where his focus is delivering phenomenal patient care with a focus on customer service. In addition to serving the communities where these clinics are located, he enjoys working with payers and regulators to ensure that patients have the access to care that they deserve. He is currently the president of Rehab Net of Arkansas, a collaboration of 200 different clinics and 1,800 providers, where they provide shared administrative support in addition to delegated contracting and credentialing for those providers. He serves on the board of directors of CareSource PASSE. Did I say that right?
Pass, like you pass on something.
Okay. An Arkansas Managed Medicaid insurance company, and is currently the pay chair for APTA Arkansas. He is on various provider advisory committees with several insurance payers, as well as the therapy work group of Arkansas Medicaid. Gabe's work on ensuring sustainable reimbursement models with payers has resulted in him being twice awarded the APTA Arkansas Distinguished Service Award, as well as the Greg Wren Legislative Award. He currently serves on the PPS Payment and Policy Committee, as well as the Payment Consortium. He enjoys teaching at various universities on topics such as payment, coding, and leadership development. So, Gabe, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today, and looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. Appreciate you having me today.
So, give us a little context to begin with. Tell us kind of where you grew up, where you went to school. Obviously, you went to physical therapy school, so fill us in on that a little bit, and to where you are today.
You bet. You bet. So I grew up in a little town, north central Arkansas, called Russellville. Very much a bedroom community, and a great area to grow up in and raise a family in. Went to school at University of Central Arkansas and graduated from there kind of during the bad times of therapy. Right after Balanced Budget Act, I graduated and folks were having trouble finding jobs. It's always interesting, the supply and demand equation. I think it's the one time in history where it maybe have flipped on its head. So it was a little bit of trouble coming out of school finding a job, but I was very fortunate. One of the clinicals I was at, I had an opening, and so went to work at a hospital setting for a couple of years. A great opportunity to learn a lot and have some opportunities for leadership there. And after doing that a few years, just felt like it was time to do that on my own. So launched our first clinic in 2001. Wound up being back in my hometown at that point, and just fortunate to grow fast and move. Be able to grow in that community. So been here since 2001 at outpatient orthopedic clinic, very typical outpatient orthopedic situation. And then wound up, I've always enjoyed the administrative side of therapy. I think some people have told me that I could take medicine for that if I need to. But have always enjoyed the numbers side of it. And so wound up working with some other clinics in the state that had great therapists, but just struggled with the numbers. And so through that have kind of started looking at growth opportunities and so forth. And so we added our second clinic in 2015. And I realized at that point that there was some economies of scale that could be won there, and so um, we trucked along and really had planned on some additional growth through acquisition or de novo, and about that time, COVID hit, turned all of our world upside down, and so uh, we put a pause on that. But coming out of COVID, we've been fortunate to grow. Right now, we've to a group of about 5 clinics in our area, and just love working and serving in our communities, and being able to take care of our neighbors and friends.
Okay, so you own two outpatient facilities and in private practice, and then but you're helping administer or coach three others for a total of five. Is that correct?
Well, so I started out with some of the coaching side of it, and through that process, really, that's where the acquisition came from. I worked with a
Oh,
number
okay.
of folks that just said, "Hey, we understand we got to operate differently if we're going to move forward, and we're at a place in our career we're ready to step away." And so acquired two of those, and then we've had a couple of de novos as well.
Okay.
And so we're a total of 5 right now,
Okay.
and all within kind of about 150-mile geographic area, which in our area, that's about all the big towns you're going to get. It's 5
Yeah.
big towns at 150 miles, but it's been good. I've enjoyed working with the some of the owners have stayed on, and that's been great. With some of the situations we've had folks come up through our ranks, and that's been a real joy. Is just working with folks and helping them understand the business side of it, understand the leadership side of it, and just kind of being able to pour into them and help those clinics be successful.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Now you said you went to the University of Central Arkansas, correct? Is that where Nancy Reese is?
It is, yes. She
Was
was
she
my
there?
she
Yeah.
was she was my
Okay.
neuroanatomy professor. We've become good friends since. When I was going through school, I was scared to death of her. She knows her stuff, and
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, she was there, did a great job as an instructor. Now as the dean, doing a phenomenal job, and
Yeah.
she's always been a great mentor and friend. I've been able to go back and actually her administrative class. I learned a hard lesson with there. I was a number of years ago. She was asking me how the program could be better. Always trying to grow and develop, and I said, well, one of the things that I was frustrated as an employer coming out was that the lack of business knowledge that students had. And this has been 10, 12 years ago now, maybe 15. And she said, you could help us solve that. So I started guest lecturing in her admin class. So if you
Yeah.
present a problem, she gives you the opportunity to fix it. But she's
Yeah.
was great, and got me the opportunity to do just a little bit of the fun part of teaching. I guess I get to go in and drop in
Yeah.
and do a couple of lectures and get out before the hard part starts. And so it's been
Yeah.
good.
Well, she's been a past guest on this podcast as well, many years ago, but she's amazing and a real believer in leadership development and leadership training and all that. So I think she does a great service to students, through those programs. And as dean now, I don't know how much teaching she's doing, but she certainly believes in the concept. And so, yeah, I've always really enjoyed hanging around Nancy.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, she's great.
So now there's also a bigger thing that you're involved with too, which is the network, correct? So
That's right.
tell us a little bit about what the network looks like and how it's managed, and is it just in Arkansas or is it multiple state?
You bet. So our network is called Rehab of Arkansas, and it's an organization that I truly have been able to stand on some shoulders of giants. Some guys in the '90s put this network together, really in response to work comp managed care networks. As they were moving into the state, they really needed the opportunity to work through contracts as a group, and not individually. And so RehabNet was founded as a nonprofit in the mid 90s. Actually, there's two groups that were very similar in nature. They joined under the RehabNet brand. And I got involved after I opened my first clinic. I was elected to the board a couple of years later, and just got to sit underneath and be mentored by some great leaders and some true visionaries in that. And then about 10 or so years ago, I was elected president of that organization. And it was a real pivotal time for insurance I'd say payer provider relationships in Arkansas. The Medicaid relationship had really kind of gotten a little bit volatile between providers and Medicaid, and with some of the other payers, and there was a lot of friction as a piece of that. And so
Yeah.
RehabNet was able to kind of harness some of that energy collectively, and go to the payers and say, "Hey, we've got a problem with the providers. The providers are not able to get what they need from the payers. The payers they didn't like the situation either, and so we were able to kind of step in and provide some possible solutions and bring that back to providers to help." And so during that time, there was some great leaders around me. We had some explosive growth. We went from, probably 30 to 40 clinics, 30 to 40 individual tax IDs. So right now we have 110 different tax IDs, 110 different companies that make up RehabNet, and they make up around 200 locations across our state. Some of our members do have clinics in bordering communities outside of our state, but generally it's an Arkansas-based organization. We work under the messenger model, is with our member clinics, and with a volunteer board. We have 3 staff, executive director, and then she does a great job, and then we have 2 staff that help her in her role. And so through the 2015 to current time, we've really been able to develop relationships with the payers to where we can take the problems that the payers are having with providers and really go back to providers with provider-centric language on how to fix them. And then the problems that providers are having, some of them are administrative or technical in nature. We can help the provider to solve that on their own. And then some of them are bigger issues that we've got to get with the payer to collectively come up with a better solution. And so we will take that collectively to the payer, and work through that. Some in very formalized ways, some in very informal. But it really kind of congealed over the last 10 to 12 years
Yeah.
through some of that.
So now, are the original founders and owners of that network still involved?
They very much are. Yes,
What are their
still.
names? What are their names?
So Seth Coulter was the founding
Okay.
president of our organization. It's interesting. Seth owns a clinic literally a mile from my front door.
Yeah.
Him and I are competitors. We always joke and say we're frenemies.
Yeah.
But he and I have worked collaboratively on many projects over the last 10, 15 years. And he really set the tone, that a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah.
I think when I first got involved, there was a little bit of a sentiment among, I think, the therapy community of exclusiveness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he, I feel like, was on the front edge of, we want to have some boundaries around quality of care. We want to have some boundaries around ethics, and there's the boundaries that need to be there.
Yeah.
But I don't know that geography is one of those.
Yeah.
And so he really set that tone, and has really been a mentor to me through the years to help develop the network.
Yeah, well, my role when I was with Therapeutic Associates as their CEO, and before that as well, we had a very robust, large network in the Pacific Northwest, and I couldn't agree with you more that, when we first started, it was like, oh my gosh, everyone was holding their cards very close to the vest, and we're, and soon realized that, if we just collaborate and share information and work together, we all benefit. And, I think that's one of the things that networks have really shown us and helped us through that process. So I'm glad to hear yours is still going strong. Ours is up here as well. And, I think networks make a difference. So let's talk about that a little bit, because you've had some good success. I mean, everybody says, oh my gosh, payers, you can't get to them, you can't talk to them, they don't listen to you, they keep reducing their payments. It's just kind of doom and gloom and doom and gloom. And you've had a little success in Arkansas, so share that with us and how you did it.
You bet. So again, it's been a huge team effort. A lot of people put a lot of hours and time and energy into that. I think, some of it started, in about 2016. Again, there was a lot of friction between the PTOT speech space and our Medicaid system. There'd not been a pay raise in years. There was a lot of administrative challenges as a part of that. And as we started working with the regulators on that, really we started by putting out some position papers that help providers to translate regulation into practice. And really kind of looking for some administrative issues or administrative solutions to some coding issues that were going on there. About that time, Arkansas moved to a managed Medicaid environment, and we really kind of did a unique thing called a PASSE. PASSE stands for Provider Arkansas Shared Savings Entity, and by statute, the a PASSE it's a risk bearing entity. It is a managed Medicaid company that has to be 51% provider owned. And one of those providers is 6 different provider types. One of them has to be a provider of developmental delayed individuals. So very commonly that winds up being a therapist. And so to put that another way, a therapist has to be on the board of a managed Medicaid entity, and not only on the board, but an equity shareholder. And so it gives us a voice. And as a part of that, RehabNet helped to form one of the passes, and through that process, we distinguished ourselves not only as problem solvers, but folks that could help calm the waters. We didn't want to just stir the pot and be confrontational. We wanted to be fair, we wanted to be collaborative, and we wanted to be willing to call out the bad actor, not only if it was obviously a payer, but a bad actor if it was a provider. And so through some of that, we developed a lot of strong relationships in the payer community. And one of the first things that came up was we had some coding issues that the managed Medicaid system could not, their claims management system couldn't handle the way Arkansas Medicaid did coding. And everyone kind of was looking at everybody else to come up with a solution. And so we were able to understand it from the payer side. We understood it from the provider side. And so we came up with a solution that's worked really well. And so, I think it really speaks to advocacy and how it really works. You have to build trust first, and the payers have to understand that you're not just there to get something out of them, but that you're there to help give them something. And so that was a big piece of that. And so our
And
first,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, listening to you talk about this, it's within the Medicaid system, and a lot of people across the nation, especially in private practice, are not big healthcare, companies, whatever, kind of run from Medicaid because they have a history of not paying well, and they can be difficult to deal with, and so on. So I'm intrigued that you chose Medicaid and went and collaborated with them. So why Medicaid?
I think because it was our biggest pain point. Um, it was a huge pain point for us, especially for our pediatric providers. The other piece to it was um, it seemed to be where we felt like we could get the most traction early. And I'd love to say we chose it. In a lot of ways, it chose us, but just simply because uh, um, we saw problems be presented that we felt like we had solutions for, and administratively, and the regulators were willing to entertain those. And I think part of it too was um, there was a loud noise among providers, not only with PT, but PT, OT, and speech. And probably the higher utilizers of OT and speech in our state is the Medicaid system, just because of the pediatric environment.
Yeah.
And so we were able to kind of be collaborative and kind of work as the three disciplines together. And that's where we just got traction first. And so we kind of went through the door that was open.
Yeah. And did you have an effect on payment rates? I mean, did you get some reasonable payment for your services? And in the past, that was questionable?
We did. We went from one of the lowest payers in the country, and we had some things bounce our way, but at the same time, through our previous issues we'd worked with them, we were very data driven, and so our governor in about 2021 mandated a rate review for all providers. Consultant came in and said that PTOT and speech rates were fair and did not need to be changed, which we highly
Yeah.
disagreed with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And And they wanted to use not only bordering states, but the methodology they choose was they wanted to look at providers in our CMS MAC. How did we compare to them? And so we became students of the states in our CMS MAC and how their Medicaid system worked. And through that process, data was king. I mean, we dove into the data. Quite frankly, we knew the data better than the consultant knew the data. And I'll have to give Alice Bell and some of her team at APTA really kudos there, because they helped us put together some of that data, provide some of the normative data that was out there. And we came back to say that we think the consultant is wrong, and here's why. And it was interesting because when we met with the regulators and the consultant, he came back and said, my report stands on its own. I'm not going to defend it. It is what it is. And that was a turning point, because that told
Yeah.
us the consultant didn't really know.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
so to have that kind of debate or discussion or whatever you want to call it with people within the state Medicaid system, you must have built some relationships and some trust up before you had these kind of conversations, I would assume.
yeah, we really did. And I think the key there is we had spent years at that point, probably 5 years at that point, helping them solve their problems, not just coming to them with ours. And we understand therapy, and as therapists, we understand the business of therapy infinitely better than anyone else ever will. And as they would have issues that was causing provider noise, it was just noise to them. They didn't know how to step in our businesses and solve them. And so when we could go in and say, if we could change the regulation from A to B, or maybe half a step towards B, it would make the business of therapy that much easier. The effect was that decreased provider noise. And regulators, especially with state Medicaid system, unlike our commercial payer friends, sometimes they can turn a blind eye to the noise, as long as their patients don't walk away from them. But the regulators in beside Medicaid have trouble walking away from the legislators, and so you can make noise that they had to listen to, and so they would step in with some of the solutions that we proposed, and the noise would go away, and so it really earned a high level of trust.
So, I'm thinking of, that process and that advocacy part, and I know that you were a big part of that. Um, but like you said, it was all about data. So first of all, data, isn't something that PTs are, traditionally known for. So you had to have a person and that understood it and could work with it. Was that you, or is that somebody else that did that? And then the next question related to that is then what's the leadership style or leadership approach to get in, bureaucratic, we've heard this before, leave us alone type of institution. And how do you get in there and get them to change their minds? It's incredible.
Yeah, I think, I am a little bit of a reforming data nerd. I enjoy the data side of therapy. I think I have just, again, some of the folks at the National APTA were very helpful in parsing some of that. The I think as well, we had to frame some of the poor rates through access of care. There's some federal mandates. We learned by being on the board of the PASSE. There's some federal mandates around network adequacy that were out there, and if rates get low enough, network adequacy fails. And so knowing that information and being on the inside there, we understood that now. At a level that we hadn't understood that before. I think the other part to it is we had to be willing to block and tackle for the regulators. If a policy needed to be there, we had to understand why they felt like it needed to be there. And if it was justifiable, we had to be willing to go back to the providers and say, um, guys, this is how it needs to be and why, and put it in language providers could understand. So it wasn't that relationship couldn't be unilateral. It had to be bidirectional. And so, as a part of that, we were able to get implemented a payment rate that increased our payments over the course of 2 years, or increased our payments by about 31%, and puts us, fairly close to where Medicare is,
Yeah.
which is a big step for us with Medicaid.
That's incredible. I mean, that's not every state can tell that story. So congratulations on that. So now looking at other payers, the commercial payers and whatever, have you used the same approach and have you had some success with them as well?
Sure. I think, we have tried to, after that, we really, to be quite honest, the lessons learned from that, we felt like help us understand the priorities of the commercial payers. And so one of the things we did at that point is starting routinely engaging the commercial payers that RehabNet holds contracts with. We do delegated contracting, delegated credentialing for all of our members. So it's administrative simplification for the payer. And so we got back with the payers and said, hey, we want to work out a dialogue, much like we had developed with Medicaid organically. We wanted to be intentional about working that out with the commercial payers. That really started with what we called a joint operating committee with each of our contracted payers. And so that is a often once a month opportunity for us to meet with the payer and bring problems to them. A lot of those are claims problems. A lot of those are just organic, systematic problems, not one-off, one claim issue, but a problem with the claims management system. And so, and in doing that, though, just like with Medicaid, we gain their trust. And so now we're not just whiny providers on the other end of an email chain. We're trusted friends that we spend an hour or two a month on a call working through problems that make everybody's lives better. So we did. We immediately took that to some of the commercial payers. I feel like that we've been able to renegotiate a number of those contracts. Not every one of them. I don't want to paint the picture that it's just a panacea and that everyone just does what you want.
Yeah,
Um, but
for sure.
but we've been able to renegotiate a number of those to where we've got a few that are still a little bit of a grit in my crawl, but
Mhm.
we've got a lot of them that are worked out to where a number of them that have worked out to where we're able to have sustainable model of care.
So you're being very humble, which I understand, but I mean, this is really an amazing story. So when you look at when you're talking to other PTs on a national scene and they want to know about your experience and whatever, I mean, how do you instruct them to, like, who do you contact in the insurance company or who do you contact in Medicaid? And I'm sure a lot of people look at that and say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I can't get to anybody who maybe one cares or secondly can have any authority to make a change.
Yeah, great question. I think for us, getting inside of the commercial payers, we started with the small regional payers because they're going to be more likely to have provider reps. You start with the provider reps and you bring global problems to them, not as a whiner, but you bring it to them as a, hey, this is a problem for therapists across the board. We have, they're going to start creating noise with regulators, the insurance departments, the work comp commissions, and we want to prevent that. So help us keep the noise down by let's work on solving this common problem. And then we moved those into the JOCs. And I thought it was interesting. We learned about the JOC because of our work with the PASSE. That's a very common thing in the insurance world. They all know what it is. They do them with their entities that they work with outside of their organization. And so when we ask for that, we're not asking for something that's unfamiliar to them, and they understand what their intent is. And so I think starting with the small regional payers, once you get a few, just like in therapy, therapists move around and they go from company to company. Provider reps do that, and so now that you've got a friend in the next company, and then as a part of that, we looked for opportunities when there was a big blow up. When we had a problem with a new policy that went in, and it created all kinds of friction, we would step in and try to be a voice of reason in that friction and use that to earn that trust. So part of it's looking for opportunity and jumping on it when it presents itself.
So you're saying is it, are you the payer relations whisperer, or is there a team that goes in there and does this? I mean, come on, if it's you, tell me. I want to hear about it.
Sure. Well, I often will be a part of that, but it's not just me. And part of it, we look and see who the best person to go in. Sometimes there's a board with RehabNet, and we all have our own relationships. I'm the pay chair for Arkansas, APTA Arkansas. We work extremely close with AROTA, the Arkansas chapter of the Occupational Therapy Association, as well as the speech therapy, the ARCSA organization. And so we look across the spectrum of all of those entities and say, who has the best relationship? Who has the current trust of that organization? Oftentimes, sometimes that's politically. RehabNet has its own a lobbyist, and we lean on them heavily sometimes to talk lobbyist to lobbyist with a payer to say these folks need a seat at the table. One of our major payers in the state, they gave us that we'll take it under advisement, but leave us alone. And until we got our lobbyist involved, and our lobbyist was able to connect with their lobbyist and start that ball rolling. And then once we got in there, we had to provide value to them. You can't just get in there and ask for things. You've got to get in and provide value to them. And so with this large payer, they were doing some things that, quite frankly, weren't following Arkansas law around prompt payment and some of those kind of things. And we got the stiff arm. It was very much a we're not going to meet with you environment for about a year. And so as a part of that, we always want to start with collaboration. We always want to be collaborative, but sometimes you have to move to conflict. And so we created and educated our membership on how to file complaints with the insurance department. And so all of a sudden, a number of insurance departments complaints started coming in on this one payer, which motivated them to now start meeting with us. And so we always want to be somebody's friend, but sometimes that doesn't work, and so sometimes we have to move to conflict, and that works as well. It just depends on which button needs pushed with which payer.
Well, what you're describing is a masterclass in leadership, so it's working well. But what are you doing to make sure this is sustainable? I mean, when Gabe's not around or when Gabe decides to do something different, what are you doing to bring others along so that they can continue this leadership approach to working with payers and government agencies?
You bet. I think this is probably one of the things that have been, quite frankly, my personal, when I think about my personal growth, and something that I'm really enjoying right now, both inside of RehabNet or inside of my company, I'm really enjoying finding folks that just have natural gifts along some of these things, and pouring into them. And so we've been very intentional with our board of directors within RehabNet to recruit younger talent, to recruit folks that might be 10 or 15 years my junior, and other boards, I'm 10 or 15 years the junior of a lot of people on the board, or some of the folks on the board. And so I'm trying to do to them what guys like Seth Coulter did with me, and say, walk alongside me and do some of these. And so we've been very intentional within RehabNet trying to recruit younger leaders to do some of this. We've also been very intentional, quite frankly, with the OT Association and the Speech Therapy Association. With that, we feel like as therapy goes, what's good for therapy is good for PT. And so we have really tried to identify key leaders within those organizations, or if we've got some key, let's just say, occupational therapists inside of RehabNet, we strongly encourage them to get engaged inside of the Occupational Therapy Association, because we feel like at different times, RehabNet has the voice. We feel like sometimes the professional association has the voice. And we need key leaders in all of those organizations so that the right person is available with that voice when the opportunity arrives.
How did that process start? Again, maybe I'm going back a few years, but I remember when APTA tried to work a lot with the Occupational Therapy Association, and there was some friction. There were some different, people had different goals in mind and want to accomplish different things and didn't want to come along at the same level, and so that caused problems. Did you run into that in Arkansas? Was it tough to get going and you had to work through some issues? Tell us about trying to get the OTs and the speech therapists on board with your ideals.
You bet. I think we did have some of that. It's never been what I would say overly caustic, at least during my tenure. But there was definitely not a huge the spirit of collaboration that there is today. And I think one thing that was important whenever we saw the opportunity with Medicaid to go in and have a voice there. It was important to myself and a few of the key leaders that we didn't go in and just talk about PT. This was a therapy problem. The kids that we were working with, they needed, quite frankly, in there were many cases they needed OT or speech more than they needed PT. It's just we got our foot in the door with the right folks to have those conversations. And so through that process, and when we worked through the rates, we actually got with some of the national leadership with ASHA and with AOTA, and we got some data from them as well. And so when we went in and negotiated those rates, we actually negotiated the rates for PT, OT, and speech. Now, that wasn't all altruistic, because many of RehabNet members, owners, they had OT and speech in their businesses, and so that was important to our membership there.
Yeah.
But we just felt like we were all stronger together. And so when we did that, we substantially increased payment rates for all disciplines. And, I think, it's just a truism of human nature that you put your money where your mouth is. And the money piece of it, we told them we wanted to be collaborative. We fought financially to be collaborative. And when we showed out to be true there, a spirit of collaboration really kind of brewed up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's great. I mean, you guys have done a great job of that, and it's a very long-term strategy, right? I mean, you're not going to solve this in a few months, or you're not going to, expect changes, immediately. It's building these relationships, building things over time, and of course, it takes too long. We all know it takes too long, but at least you saw some movement in not only cooperation between the groups, but also in reimbursement or payment levels, which benefits everybody.
Yeah, it really is. I think you've got to understand advocacy as a marathon. And quite frankly, we've stumbled across one or two quick hits, but quite frankly, that wasn't advocacy, that was bum luck.
Yeah.
We had some situations happen with some of the payers where they had a need in the area around network adequacy, and because we had been doing the hard work for 7 or 8 years, we were able to step in and get a quick win. But without that long-term strategy, it's really difficult.
So why pick, advocacy as one of the things that you do, and you're benefiting your state and other colleagues? Because as we just said, it's digging a ditch. It's hard, and I mean, sometimes when you go on the national scene, there's a little bit of what's the word, passion or excitement around the fact that you're meeting with legislators that you see on TV and people that you know on the national scene or whatever. But when you get back into the state, it's not quite that way, and it's just one step at a time, talking to a lot of different people. I'm sure you run into some really nice people, and I'm sure you run into some just people you don't even want to be around. So why is advocacy one of the things that you love to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think as leaders, we've got to ask ourselves, and I think we find our greatest motivation in what breaks our heart. At the end of the day, being in my clinic and having patients come in who had true need, and these were my fourth grade teachers. I mean, they weren't just, a name on the end of a piece of paper. And for um, their insurance company to put them through the ringer, when a true need was there. I think that started, that was a large piece of it, just because it wasn't fair, it wasn't right. I think my turning point around advocacy really happened as we were moving into Medicaid managed care. We were involved in getting the law passed that required a provider to be on the board of directors. And so during that time, there was a dance going on at our state capitol with all the different payer, the risk-based entities moving into the state, trying to meet with different provider groups to figure out who all could form one of these passes. And I was in one of these meetings at one point, and they were talking about how they would set up new contracts across the state. And as we were discussing rates and terms of contracts and all these type of things, one of the top executives for this national payer, was talking about how we were going to do contracting for physical occupational speech therapy. And I'm in the room, and he says, we're just going to send the therapist our base level agreement because they'll sign anything.
Yeah.
And I remember that was a turning point moment for me, and it made me mad, because it made me mad. Number one, because it was true. As an industry, we do tend to do that, but it also made me mad simply because they figured out they can bully us. And you know, I guess I'm a little old school. I grew up in rural Arkansas, and my mama always taught me you punch a bully in the nose. And that set me off. And I think that was really the genesis for a lot of this.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. Now, are you being asked by other states, you know, that hear your story and whatever, and they want you to consult with them and tell them how to do it? Are you doing that?
Well, you know, one of the things that I have had some opportunity to do that. You know, RehabNet has proven to be a very viable model, in the regards of it's been effective. It's think there are a number of other states that are looking to set up RehabNet like organizations. And so I've had the opportunity to meet with a number of them, because there's a reality to size matters. You know,
Yeah,
quite frankly, the payers don't want to meet with one provider.
right.
But if I can walk in and say I represent 1,800 providers, you've got a quick audience.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there are a number of other states, and I think it's been a great model of that they're looking at setting up these type of organizations in their state, and I've been able to meet with them, meet with two in particular pretty routinely as they're in their infancy, and you know that's a passion project for me, because I believe I love what we do as therapists. You know, I think the beauty of our industry is you know we've got all the pressures and things, but at the end of the day, what we do with our patients works. We're not selling snake oil, and if I can do something to empower folks in other states to then go do that in their communities, that just feels good at the end of the day, and I enjoy doing that.
Well, it feels good and it's what you like to do, but I would also say I hope they're paying you for that because one of the things that I've said with PTs are a little bit cheap, you know, it's kind of like, well, let's just ask somebody and out of the goodness of their heart they're going to give us all this time and information and counseling and coaching and all that and every other healthcare aspect, you know, they've got highly paid consultants doing that. So, you
Yeah,
know, I think as a profession we need to step up and say if we've got somebody who knows what they're doing and we want that information, let's find a way to pay them so that you know they're not doing it just out of the goodness of their heart, but you know it's worth their while as well.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know that may be where my PT heart still struggles a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's I've encouraged. I think our profession is at a little bit of a turning point, or I hope it is, to where you know I think from the stories I hear, you know, in the '80s, maybe the pendulum swung very much in the favor of providers. And I think we are now where it has swung too far the other way in the hands of the payers. And I think I'm hoping that we're starting to see a little bit of an enough's enough moment among the provider community, and not just the PT provider communities. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
the PCPs and the other specialties that are out there, that we're saying enough's enough. We've got to do something different.
Has your network had any internal discussions about taking it to the next level, which would be one tax ID number, and just all coming together that way?
We have. We actually worked on that pretty deeply. We worked with some folks. I think you probably know Jim Hormy and Craig
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
in
Sure.
Minnesota. They really helped us during some of that growth phase. We looked at trying to go to an MSO type model. And we actually did a pilot project with one of the regional payers where we looked at our outcomes. We used one of the national outcomes tools that is out there, and got that integrated through all of our clinics. And then we went to the payer and we said we would love to look at our total cost of care among those who are not in this group that's looking at outcomes. And we looked at, with them. It's really interesting. I did a really unique data share with them. Over time, we showed that our total cost of care was in excess of 30% less than those outside of our group, and had looked at expanding that with some pilot projects around payment with them. About that time, that regional payer got bought out.
Yeah, great,
And
great.
yeah, so it caused some issues. It was really interesting. I thought we met with the national leadership that bought this entity out, and he said, he said, I've got you guys have a proposal on my desk that's going to save us $5 or $6 million. He said, I've got a stack of proposals I need to evaluate with 10 or 15, I'm sorry, $5 or $6 million. I've got a stack of proposals to save 10 to 15 million. I can't do that. And now I don't know how accurate those numbers were, but
Yeah.
I think it paints the picture of, and I love to tell payers that story, to say we are a tiny piece of the puzzle. We're putting so much energy into restricting a tiny piece of the puzzle. Let's find a better way.
I can remember sitting at a lunch one time with a high-level executive of an insurance company and having a great conversation. He brought one of his people to the lunch, and so I was there with our regional executive director,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what they said was, well, you're such a small blip on the screen, compared to these other things. It's hard to find time. And our guy just came back and just hit him right between the eyes and said, so then why do you give us so much problems and so much, it's like, if we're such a small blip on the screen, then why do you fight us every step of the way?
Yes,
And, whatever. And the guy didn't know how to answer it,
I love it.
so it was a very uncomfortable, awkward conversation, but internally I was going, yes, yes, told him the truth. So anyway, that can be frustrating for sure.
That's great. Yeah.
So what are lessons learned? We hear the story. I think it's impressive. I think you've done some amazing things in your state. And when I know you're not done. It's an ongoing journey. It will always be ongoing. But now you look back and you say, okay, what have we learned through this process? And if you could say to others that are listening, what have you learned? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say that it starts with relationships. You can have all the logic in the world, you can have all the talking points in the world, but it starts with relationships. And so for us, the JOCs were big parts of that. I think realizing that the regulators are humans too. They have a job to do and they have pressures on them as well. And where can you go in and reduce friction for them? How can you solve their problem? Does their claims processing confusion? Is there network adequacy problems? We've had payers come to us and say, we need a provider in this county. And so we work to go find that for them. Let's solve their problems. Because when you do that, you gain their trust. And once you have their trust, that's when the data starts to matter. And I think at that point, again, data is king. I think you've got to know your data. I think you got to know their data, and maybe know it better than they do. I think for us too, we always want to frame what we're doing through the lens of access to care, and it all goes back to being able to provide care in our community. And really, I think as you're working with regulators or working with folks at the other end of the line with a payer, I think we've got to be willing to educate them on how to justify things to their bosses, or maybe run interference for them with certain providers that don't like certain things. A great example was the Medicaid thing. Not, we were able to make meaningful change there, but unfortunately, we had providers in our state raise Cain to their legislators saying it wasn't enough. Which I understand a strategy around some of that. You're never happy, so you can always ask for more. But at the same time, I've got to be honest and say we took a hard look at this, and this is what the data supported. So let's be realistic here. So I think you've got to be willing
Yeah.
to be a friend on both sides of it.
Yeah, for sure. Are you still treating patients, Gabe, or are you strictly on the administrative end these days?
I do treat a limited number. I still love patient care. I get on the floor with patients and just have a ball. I tell you, the ability to speak into the lives of other therapists has just been a real joy, though, over the last couple of years. And so I'm spending a lot of time, kind of in mentor relationships with some younger folks. Not only around the administrative side, but the treatment side, and just really enjoy that more than I'm deeply involved in patient care. I saw patients yesterday, so I don't want to say that it never happens,
Yeah.
but I found that I can have a bigger reach by really pour into the lives of some other folks than I can singularly being on the floor with patients each day. And so, but I still love doing it. Still enjoyable thing.
So looking at your business specifically, not in the network in total, but just your 5 clinics and so on, what does that look like in the future for you? Do you want to add more clinics? Do you want to, are you trying to develop people within those facilities to be the next generation? Tell us a little bit about what your philosophy is and strategy for the future of your specific practice.
You bet. Yeah, we are definitely in a growth mode with our practice. We added two clinics last year. We are on pace to have one additional this year, and we have a couple in the hopper for a couple communities that we're interested in over the next several years. I think for me, again, I have enjoyed taking um, um, in a lot of ways clinics that might be because of the pressures that we have on us, working with clinics over time, I think a lot of times it's just like doing therapy. We know what the norms are. We go in and look and see where maybe they're not performing to the norm, and then we look for intervention to get to the norm. In a lot of ways, that's what we're doing in therapy every day. And so I enjoy day to day with all of our locations, finding things that aren't operating at the norm, and knowing what norms should be, and then going and looking for a strategy to get that normalized. The and really around the leadership piece of that, I really am enjoying working with what I consider high level leaders that want to not only serve their clinics well, and the folks working under them, but serve the therapy community well. So I'm spending a lot of time pouring into the lives of some key leaders in our organization, and trying to prepare, either support them in their role in our locations where they are now, or perhaps get them ready to go open additional locations. And so I spend a lot of time really working around some of the leadership pieces with a lot of our staff.
And do you have a formalized leadership development program, or are you looking at more one-on-one coaching, mentoring type of things at this stage?
So that's been again just a big growth area for me personally. We've done some informal stuff for a number of years, and that's kind of what we've done up to this point. One of the things that our organization at RehabNet realized as a recruiting that nowadays clinicians coming into private practices want to be mentored. And so we spent last year as an organization, and we put some money and some resources into developing a formalized program that each of our member clinics can then take and implement inside of their own clinic. And so I'm in the process right now of just starting that formalized program. And we're going to identify, we've identified and a little bit self-selected a few of our key leaders that want to move into leadership, or perhaps be a partner at some point in the future. And we're taking them through that curriculum at this point. And then we eventually hope to open that up, at least at some level, to all staff. Even if they're a PT student working in a tech role for a few years before they go to PT school, we want to open that up to them down the road as space allows and as time permits.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Good for you. So, in anticipation of our discussion today, has there been anything that I haven't asked or haven't covered that you want to be sure and get in the program?
Boy, I think as folks are thinking about advocacy and thinking about really making change in their communities, I think advocacy takes a lot of forms. One of the things that we've talked about, collaboration and conflict. I think educating providers in their community when new contracts come out. When it's one of the things, if a new contract from a payer comes out, we have town halls to talk about. We don't necessarily may not talk about that specific contract, because obviously there's some pieces of the puzzle there you got to be careful of, but maybe what is a good contract? APTA has some great resources out there, and so I think you have to do education around that, and I think permeating the payer communities, you got to become their friend. I think the other thing is, and this is one thing that Janet Shelley and Gwen Simons have taught me over the last couple of years is, advocacy through appeals. I think this is a new thing that we're starting to do, that I think as a group of providers, PTs don't tend to appeal things very much. We just let it go. And we have started almost a 100% appeal when something comes in. We've educated folks a lot in our state about how to appeal. Sometimes that's to the insurance department. Sometimes that's to the ALJs with Medicare. And we're seeing about a 70 to 80% success rate with those appeals. And we had a unique thing a couple of weeks ago with one of the Medicare ALJs. There's a second, it just so happened it was our second appeal with this specific judge. And this gentleman said, "Haven't I met y'all before?" And we said, "Yeah, we were on the appeal with you a few months ago." And
Yeah.
he said, "What are these people doing to y'all?" And I just explained some of the frustrations that we had. And he said, "This should never have gotten this far." He said, "I'm going to go to the MAC and discuss this with them."
Yeah.
And I just think that's a level of appeal that we can't do ourselves, but when we can recruit our folks there around us, that's very helpful.
Yeah, just don't sit back and take it. You got to keep poking, 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 and that's amazing that you're not only educating your people to do that, but you have a process on how to do that, and it sounds like it's been effective. So, Gabe, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Wow. Yeah, I think what I would say, what I've learned so much over the last couple of years, where I'm at in my leadership journey, is for those of us in leadership positions, I think our default is to strive. Is to strive for the next thing. Whether that's a credential or a metric or a referral source or the next acquisition. But I read a lot, and one of the things I think John Maxwell says is leadership is influence. And I think if we take our desire to strive, this natural inherent desire, and we take that energy and figure out, maybe ask ourselves, how can I use the influence I've been given as a leader to help the next leader go further, to help them dream bigger or become better? I think when we take that striving energy and ask that question of ourselves, when we pour into others to get them what they want, I think so much of the time I've just found in my leadership journey, what I'm looking for just seems to work out.
Yeah,
And so that's been a big learning lesson for me the last few years.
well said. Well, Gabe, this has been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm a real admirer of what you're doing there in your state, and as I said earlier, you're just doing some amazing things at the leadership level, but also the altruistic things for the PT and broader therapy community as a whole. And we need people like that. So thanks for doing your part. And like I said, I learned a lot today, and hopefully others did as well. So thanks for being on the program and sharing your story with us.
You bet. Awesome. It's great to be with you today.
Okay, well, take care, and I hope we run into each other down the road one of these days.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.